Hello and welcome to another episode of Leaders of Transformation. Today we've got a treat. We have a world-renowned speaker, motivational speaker, amazing individual here. Chris actually reached out to me on LinkedIn. Man, I love LinkedIn. You get to meet the most amazing people. And so Chris Widener is here with us today, and he is going to talk about character and talk about his journey to becoming a world-renowned speaker and influencer. And so, Chris, welcome, Leaders of Transformation. We're excited that you're here today.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I appreciate it. A lot of fun.
It's a pleasure. Well, let me brag on you. I'll brag on you a little bit, and then you can expand on that. But Chris is actually, as I said, one of the top speakers in the world today. He speaks to groups as small as 100 up to 25,000 people. His clients are a who's who of American businesses, including General Electric, Cisco, Microsoft, Harvard Business School. He actually worked with a couple of people that I have huge respect for, Jim Rohn and Zig Ziglar. In fact, Jim Rohn made Chris his last protégé, and he worked with him the last 7 years of his life. They co-authored a book together, the Jim Rohn 1 Year Success Plan, as well as Jim's last book, The 12 Pillars, which has become an international bestseller. And Zig Ziglar, who is considered one of the greatest motivational speakers of the 21st century, one of my all-time favorites, personally chose Chris to co-host his television show, True Performance. And Chris is the author of 12 books and over 150 articles on success, leadership, sales, motivation. And incidentally, two of Chris's books, The Angel Inside and The Art of Influence, are the only two fiction books that Zig Ziglar ever endorsed. Along with co-hosting True Performance, Chris has hosted his own show, Made for Success, where he's interviewed some of the world's top business achievers. And he also co-hosts a podcast called The Real Man Podcast with Larry Winget, which I just listened to, which is super fun. If you haven't heard this and you're a guy, or as they say in the intro, they say if you're a guy, if you're a real man, if you want to be a real man, or if you're a woman that appreciates a real man, pretty much everybody go and listen to that podcast. It is awesome. So again, Chris, we're really excited to have you here. For our listeners, we're excited to have you here too, because you know what? You're the reason why we do this. We do this to inspire you to be leaders of transformation, to make a greater impact in the world. And so I highly encourage you after this interview, after you listen to this, go to the leadersoftransformation.com. You can access, we'll have all the links to anything that we talk about here in this interview, but also the 200 plus interviews that we've already done to date are also there, and you can connect with some amazing difference makers and world changers, as I said, that can inspire you to be the leader of transformation that you're capable of being, also equip you, and you can connect to them and what it is that they're doing. We also love to hear your stories, and so I encourage you to send us a note, whether it's through the website or through social media. You can find us on all the major social media platforms, Leaders of Transformation or Leaders Podcast on Twitter, and we just love to hear your story. Love to hear what you're up to. And so I really do believe that there are some amazing people, and more than any time in history, perhaps, there are so many people that are looking to make a positive impact, and we want to connect them so that so we can all make a greater impact together. So with that, Chris, I know that was a long intro, but I just love bragging, and I love celebrating people's success and celebrating their strengths and their passion. And so with that in mind, let's start off with, Jim Rohn, Zig Ziglar. I know you started out working actually with John Maxwell, another legendary leader. How did you get into that situation where you got to work with these incredible individuals?
Yeah, thanks for having me. It's fun to be here. It's kind of interesting, and I think there's a great lesson in this as well. Oftentimes when people meet somebody who's in a place where they'd like to be, they will say, for example, hey, I'd like to be a great speaker like you. Can you help me? And that's the wrong question to ask. In fact, it's the exact opposite of the question you should ask. And so one of the ways that I developed a relationship with those three gentlemen in particular, John Maxwell, Zig Ziglar, and Jim Rohn, was I didn't come from the perspective of, hey, I'd like to become a great, amazing, world-class speaker. Can you help me? I came from the perspective of, I'd like to become a great, amazing, world-class speaker and author. How can I help you? And so my first foray into sort of the upper echelon was with John Maxwell, where I ghost wrote his nationally syndicated column for 18 months. He was syndicated through the business journals at that time. And, you know, they needed somebody who knew his voice and could speak his voice. And so that's what I did. From there, Jim Rohn called and said, hey, we're going to do this Jim Rohn 1-year program. We'd like you to write it. And I said, I'm not really in ghost anymore. I was sort of finishing up on my ghostwriting. I said, but I will co-write it. And so he said, done deal. So we ended up writing a Jim Rohn 1-year program from October 2002 until September 2003. And that thing still sells to this day. Years after Jim passed away, I get royalties from that every single month, 15 years later, because of Jim's amazing, you know, legacy that he's left. But it was helping him. And then writing the 12 Pillars book. And it was basically emceeing the 2004 Weekend Leadership event was another thing that I did. I was the MC. I didn't do a keynote. They gave me like a 10-minute spot where I did a little bit of thing, but my role there was to serve, right? I started a company where I was selling audio programs from hundreds of speakers, but I had, we would sell, we'd put 14 CDs and 1 DVD into a box set around a theme: leadership, sales success, verbal power, things like that. And on the cover was always three very famous people: Jim Rohn, Zig Ziglar, Dennis Waitley, you know, some John Maxwell, somebody like that. And there was always a fourth name on the cover. That was always mine, because I figured if I own the company and I can sell these guys' stuff, I'm going to put my name on the cover with them. So it was a little bit of a branding exercise, because we were selling 50 to 75,000 units a month through Costco and Sam's Club of those audio programs. And that ended up with I worked with John, worked with Jim. That ended up with a television show in Dallas of my own called Made for Success. And I was paying Zig good royalties every quarter for all the stuff we were selling through Costco. And that television network, he lived in Dallas, they asked him if he would do a TV show. And he was getting older. I mean, he was pushing 80, if not already 80. And his son Tom said, well, you know, why don't we get a co-host for you so you don't have to carry the whole show? And he said, sure. And they said, well, this guy that we know, and he's already got a show on the network, so he's down here from Seattle a lot, and, you know, why don't we ask him? So that's how I ended up. And I knew my role. My role was, we were co-hosts, but I knew better than that. The analogy I always use is, it's sort of like at the All-Star game, baseball All-Star game, they have the home run contest, and all the big hitters get up there, and their job is to hit these big home runs. And there's always a guy that throws the ball, and all he does, nice and slow, right across the plate. You know, nobody knows who that guy is. They're all focused on the big superstar standing at the plate trying to hit home runs. And so that's really what I figured my goal was. My job, my role was to just let Zig hit the ball, you know, throw it and let him hit the ball. Well, interestingly enough, taking that perspective and that attitude, about 3 or 4 episodes in, Tom came to me. Tom is Zig's son, president of Ziglar. He says, you know, Zig came to me today and he said he'd like you to talk more. He'd like you to, you know, go back and forth with him. He'd like you to throw your ideas out there. And you know, and so I was invited to participate, as opposed to saying, well, if I'm going to be the co-host, I need 14 of the 28 minutes, you know, the demanding sort of stuff. So to me, I think the lesson is to serve. And that's what I did, and it put me into an echelon that I probably never would have ever gotten into.
Well, you know, that's the thing that just came out when you were talking, was service, a life of service. And, you know, it's so often that it's like networking events. People go to networking events. Hi, who are you? And how can you help me? That's not the way to start, right. You know, a relationship or conversation, or like you said, and I know that Jeff Woods, who did the Mentee podcast, he talks all about that, asking the questions like, you know, what can I do for you? How can I serve you? And then as a result, like, you put yourself in an incredible position. And so today, I know you've written 12 books, you've done extraordinarily well. Service is one of those qualities that you have emulated here. What are some of the other qualities that you think that you would attribute to your success in being able to put yourself in positions of influence?
I think 2 things. One is, the first lesson is it's just as easy to think big as it is to think small. And I've been doing that since I was a kid. In fact, I like to tell the story of I was 14 years old and my mom was working at Group Health Hospital. And she was a receptionist or an admin or something. And she worked with a guy who was in the filing department. And all he did all day long was file medical records. I can't think of a more boring, I mean, I could never do it, just filing, alphabetizing thousands of medical records. Well, he decided he wanted to have more money than he made as a file clerk. So he borrowed $7,000 from a rich uncle, and he bought the rights to a self-watering flower pot. And it was a two-piece. It was like a bowl, and then it had another bowl that sat down on top of it. And the first bowl had the water, and then the second bowl had the dirt and the plant. There was a little thing that went down from the top bowl into the bottom bowl, and then a lever, and it decided how much water got sucked up into the dirt. It was brilliant, actually. And so he says to me, would you like to make some money? And I said, sure. And he said, well, I'll pay you $1 for every flower pot you sell. I said, great. I'm 14. Maybe 15. I wasn't driving yet because my mom, I called the buyer for a company called Ernst Home Centers, and they owned hundreds of stores in the Pacific Northwest, Washington, Oregon, Idaho, Montana. And I said, I've got a self-watering flower pot I'd like to come and show you. And they said, sure, let's set up an appointment. So my mom bought me a blue Blazer. It was the first Blazer I ever owned. And she drove me to downtown Seattle and dropped me off on the curb. And I walked in with this self-watering flower pot and showed it to him. And he said, I'll tell you what, I'll take 4 boxes per store for 20 stores for a year. So let's do the math. There was 24 flower pots in a box, but we'll say 25 for the math. So 25 times 4 is 100 per store times 20 stores is 2,000 pots times a year. So it was 24,000 pots I sold in my one and only sales call selling flower pots. So I went back to Group Health Hospital the next time and I saw him and I said, hey, I sold some flower pots. And he said, oh, you did? How many did you sell? And I said, 24,000 flower pots. And he said, he said,
excuse me?
He said, what are you talking about? So it was just as easy to think big. He thought I was going to go knock on doors and sell them to little old ladies. I thought, why not sell them 24,000 at a time instead of 2 at a time?
Yeah.
But here's another interesting lesson. He got so scared. He went back to the company and got his $7,000 back and got rid of it and didn't do it. Never did it. He got so afraid. So there's a mentality there that's really interesting to me in hindsight and studying success for 30 years. There's some people that success scares the heck out of them. And what might come out of that, and what does it mean about me, and all these kinds of things. Because if I was making $1 a pot, who knows how much he was making, per pot. He's probably going to triple his income or something like that. And this was the 80, barely 1980 or something like that, 79. So secondly, another lesson. So first one is just as easy to think big as it is to think small. So to me, it's just as easy to host a television show with Zig Ziglar as it is to traipse around the country and give little speeches in the back of a Holiday Inn Express. So for me, I've always thought big. Secondly, I got some advice a long time ago, probably 1989, 1990. Somebody said to me, be a voice, not an echo. And I've always made that sort of my mantra, be a voice, not an echo. Don't just regurgitate what everybody else is saying. And again, the book of Ecclesiastes says there's nothing new under the sun. So I understand that. But there's new ways of putting it. There's new ways to put a twist on it. There's your thoughts. There's your knowledge around it. There's your wisdom that stems from it. And so working hard at being a voice, not just an echo, has been another one that I think is important to the success that I've seen as a writer and a speaker.
Well, and how do you take that message, I guess, is a really good question, because I know that there's a lot of, we talk about how many books are written every single year. It's extraordinary. I think it's close to 1 million in the US alone that are on Amazon. Yeah. So, and everybody's talking about success and talking about leadership and all of this. And yet there are certain things that stand out. Like when you say it's like your own spin on it, but there's also certain things that stand out. It's, and I know we were talking about this last time we were chatting, was the difference between skills and character itself. And I know that like Zig Ziglar, you mentioned a few names there. So John Maxwell, Zig Ziglar, Jim Rohn, Dennis Waitley, all of them have stood the test of time. Yeah. They have I mean, Zig Ziglar and Jim Rohn passed on, and they never had that tainted reputation based on something, fallen character or whatever. And so talk a little bit about some of those things that differentiate those legends, and yourself even, and you look at your own reputation and so forth from all the things that are being taught out there. Because there's so much information, which is great, but knowledge is not power, right? It's maybe fuel. It's the applied knowledge that, of course, is power. So yeah, talk about that.
Yeah, so I think one of the things that made Zig unique was he had a position in the marketplace. First of all, he was one of the very beginning guys. I mean, you had Earl Nightingale and Cabot Roberts and Zig and Charlie Tremendous Jones and Jim. I mean, those guys were the originals in regard to sort of the success movement. Og Mandino, some of those guys. I mean, there was original guys with Success Magazine, Orson Swett Madsen, and some of those guys. But in terms of when they started really going on the road and putting on, there was an old group called American Sales Masters, and they used to put thousands of people into a room. And I think Zig was. It helps when there's the original group of people that started the National Speakers Association was 100 speakers. And now there's 2,000 members and probably 12,000 former members. There's a lot of people now that call themselves speakers and authors and the like. So I think they were the originals. And so that was, great for them in terms of branding. They became sort of the grandfathers of the whole thing. But it's not just being first. It's being able, as we mentioned earlier, not having anything catastrophic happen to them. Somebody said, what was Zig Ziglar's greatest accomplishment? And I said, making it through his life without a scandal. Same thing with Billy Graham. You look at a guy like Billy Graham, who's 90 plus years of not having a scandal. And then all the other people in his sort of genre of TV evangelist or whatever who just had scandal after scandal after horrible thing after horrible thing. And same with Jim. Jim wasn't perfect by all means. I tried to get Jim to let me write his biography, and he never really wanted to do it. Jim had been married 3 times. I think that was probably one of the things that he just didn't feel, great about, and I never was able to get him to give me permission to write that biography because he always did a thing called The Art of Exceptional Living, and I wanted to call it Jim Rohn, An Exceptional Life, and just never ended up being able to get him to pull the trigger on that. But I think what made Jim unique was he was sort of like a professor. He's like that one college professor you really liked. And that was interesting, when people say, what did you learn most about Jim and working with Jim and Zig? And I always say, to be yourself, because Jim and Zig were completely different and yet both legends in the industry. So it told me I don't have to be Zig and I don't have to be Jim. All I have to be is Chris and just be the best Chris I can be and be myself and, and be the way that I am, because, Zig could have been a politician, slapping backs and shaking hands and kissing babies and, guffawing and laughing and that. And then, Jim he'd stay in his hotel room till it was time to speak. He'd take an elevator down, he'd come into the room, he'd give a speech back to he was an introvert. And, Zig would prance the stage and he'd kneel down on the front of the stage and, he was all over and pumping that pump. He used to talk about the water pump that you'd pump, and he was loud and he's up and he's down. And then there was, just Jim with his glasses on the end of his nose, and he talked like this, and he barely moved out from behind the lectern. And, and so to me, the lesson from those guys is be yourself, because you can become a legend, whether you're an extroverted guy who moves all over the stage, or you can be a legend if you're a quiet professorial type. So I think those are probably the biggest lessons I learned from those guys. And they were both just gems of men and fun to be around. And I learned a lot from them.
Yeah. Yeah, 2 of my all-time favorites. And I remember Zig and his cadence and his voice, and just so memorable. Yeah. Seeing him.
Very unique. I mean, you think about some of these speakers, like I always say, would Tony Robbins be Tony Robbins if he was 5'4" and had a squeaky voice?
Yeah, probably not.
Probably not. I mean, sometimes, Zig had that real deep voice and the accent from Yazoo City, Mississippi. And, some of that stuff plays into the concept and the idea of who the person actually is,
Yeah,
right?
it's a persona.
And then, you look at a guy like Tony. I mean, he's a giant of a man. He's 6'6", 300 pounds probably, and big giant hands and that big voice and raspy. And that's all part of the persona.
Yeah.
So I think Jim had some of that, and Zig had some of that as well.
Yeah. Now let's talk about your book, The Art of Influence.
Yeah.
And in that book, you talk about persuading others begins with you. And so talk a little bit about that, because I know, like, we're talking to leaders of transformation or
Yeah.
aspiring leaders who want to make an impact in the world. And so influence, of course, is an important piece of that. And these gentlemen that we're talking about here knew how to influence people, but it started with them and it started with that character. But there's certain aspects that you talk about in your book. Can you kind of share some of the highlights and what you would recommend for some of our listeners and viewers, just if they want to create greater influence and impact?
Yeah, for sure. So you mentioned earlier character and skills, and that's sort of the premise of this, is that when people want to learn how to influence, and influence is the core competency of both sales and leadership. So sometimes people say, well, is influence a leadership speech or is that a sales speech? Well, it's both, because leaders and sales people both influence. One is influencing the purchase of a product or service. The other is influencing the process of a vision or a strategy or something like that. So typically when people want to learn how to influence, they think about, what do I need to do? Like, tell me, how do I convince people to buy? How do I make an argument? How do I handle objections? It's all about doing, right? And, being a big fan of Zig, you probably remember that Zig said, everybody says, I want to have what I want to have. And so tell me what I need to do in order to have what I want to have. And he said, but you're missing a whole stage there. And it's not just do have, it's be, do, have. Because who you are has an effect on what you do, and what you do has an effect on what you have. And so in my seminars, I'll say, how many of you have ever been to a skills-based seminar where you've learned to do something? Every hand goes up. And I'll ask a follow-up question, how many of you have ever been to a character training? And virtually no one, maybe 2 out of 500 people, 3, 4 out of 500 people will raise their hand. And I'll say, where did you go to a character training seminar? And almost always it's church. And so the reality is hardly anybody ever thinks about that be part. And that's what my entire career has been focused on the last 10 or 15 years is how is what we are, how does what we are affect what we do, and ultimately what we have or what we achieve. And so I tell people, there's lots of people that can train you on how to speak better, how to make an argument, how to handle objections, all the kinds of things you need to do for people. But I want to talk to you about what to be in order to gain 4 things: trust, respect, admiration, and loyalty. And you think about, if you had more trust, would you be able to lead better or sell more? If you had more respect, would you be able to lead better or sell more? If you had more admiration from people, would you be able to lead better or sell more? And if you had more loyalty, would you be able to lead better and sell more? And of course, the answer is obviously yes, right? So that's what I teach people: how to gain trust from people, and trust always comes from integrity. How to gain respect from people. It always comes from excellence, your personal standards of excellence. So you can begin working on your own integrity regardless of what anybody else is doing. You can begin to work on your own personal standards of excellence regardless of what anybody else is doing. Loyalty comes from service. I can serve other people even if they don't even like me. I can still serve other people. And admiration comes from being an optimistic, positive person, the kind of person, as Zig says, brightens the room when you walk in, as opposed to being a person who brightens the room when you walk out. So trust, respect, admiration, and loyalty are the 4 things that I teach people how to gain, and it comes from focusing on who you are and working on yourself. Jim Rohn always used to say, work harder on yourself than you do on your job. Well, work harder on yourself than you do on your employees. Work harder on yourself than you do on your prospects or your potential clients. Work hard on yourself. And that's really what the book Art of Influence is about, is working on yourself to become a better influencer.
So when you talk about, let's say, for example, trust, how do you work on yourself to build more trust with others? I mean, I guess it starts off with you, of course, trusting yourself. You got to trust yourself. If you don't trust yourself, you're are we not going to trust other people as well? But
Yeah, and it
how do you
always
actually
stems
do
from
that?
integrity. It's always integrity. And I always tell people, the first point is always the first point. You can put the other three in any order you want. But the first point that I always talk about is integrity. And integrity is an interesting word because it shares the same root word as the old math term integer. And the root of integrity means whole, because an integer is a whole number. So it means whole or complete, or as I like to say, undivided. So it means that you operate out of a single set of morals, ethics, and values, not a dual set of morals, ethics, and values. It means you don't treat one person one way, treat another person another way. It means you don't pay taxes on some of your income, but then you hide other parts of your income. It means that you operate out of that single set of morals, ethics, and values, because when you do, people can trust you. As soon as they see some division in your character, okay, he'll do this one time, he'll do this another time. Now all of a sudden they back up both literally and figuratively, and they go, okay, which one showed up today, right? And now they just don't know. The trust stems from not knowing, right? And they don't know. And so the reality is that in order to gain more trust, you have to look in the mirror and ask, am I doing anything, saying anything, acting in any way that would cause people to not trust me because I'm breaking my integrity? And the fact is that most people never look in the mirror. Most people are afraid of self-awareness because they're afraid of what they'll see. There's another thing that happens with integrity that's interesting to me as I've studied leadership. When someone else does something wrong, they look at it and they judge their actions and they say that person lacks integrity, or that person has an issue with integrity. I don't think it's ever you have integrity or you don't have integrity. I think it's sort of a sliding scale, right? Most people, I think, good people, they strive to do the best. They have cracks in their integrity. But when somebody else does something wrong to us, what do we want? We want justice, or, compensation or something. Why? Because we've looked at their actions and we've judged their actions to lack integrity, and therefore we demand some sort of judgment or justice. When we do something wrong, and this is why I've asked 1 million people, how many of you looking at the news every day would say we have a problem with integrity in the world today? Business people, religious leaders, political leaders, and everybody raises their hand. Everybody. Yes, we've definitely got an integrity problem. But then I ask a follow-up question. I say, okay, how many of you would describe yourself as a person of little or no integrity? And no one has ever raised their hand. I've asked that question probably 1 million people all around the world. And so here's why. Because when other people do something wrong, we judge their actions. When we do something wrong, we judge our intentions. And so therefore, we don't ever hold ourselves to the same standards. Not because I think we are deceptive people or we want to get something over on somebody. It's just that we don't know another person's intentions, so all we have to judge is their actions. But with us, we might do something wrong, or we'll yell at somebody, somebody that works for us, but we didn't intend to. Something was going on at home and we were frustrated. And so we give ourselves credit that we would never give somebody else. And so therefore, we don't look at ourselves and say that was a break in integrity. We'll look at somebody else and say that was a break in integrity. We look at ourselves and say, well, I didn't really mean to. So we don't take that good, long look in the mirror and say, maybe this is why my employees don't follow my lead. Maybe this is why people aren't buying from me, because we haven't really been honest with ourselves that our actions are less than filled with integrity.
Well, and that brings up the authenticity and the transparency. And, there's a lot of conversation about that vulnerability and so forth. But what you're talking about, which really stands out for me, is the self-awareness and the measure by which we, evaluate ourselves, and then being absolutely honest. I mean, like you said, we compare. We look at ourselves differently than other people. My cat
Absolutely.
wants to show up. He is very insistent about this. So
Yeah.
here we are. How you doing?
There you go.
Good. He's been trying to get on. I've been recording a number of podcasts today, and he's been really trying to get on a podcast badly. So there you go. There's his little cameo appearance. But coming back to this issue of integrity, and I think we are experiencing a major issue. Maybe you can tell me if I'm wrong on that, but we are experiencing an issue with integrity, and even just social media. I mean, everybody shows the highlight reel, and this is this is, my life is awesome and look at all the awesome things. And I've seen people even with their husband and wife and, they've got these beautiful pictures. They look like they're so in love. And then, a few months later, I'm hearing that they're separated or
Right.
whatever. And it's like, so we're starting to question those things. But like you said, we have to start with ourselves before we start pointing the finger at other people. We need to start, looking at ourselves first.
Yeah, when we talk about is there more of a problem today than ever before, I don't think so. I think we just have the ability to hear about it more than ever before. I mean, if you go back to the very first human beings, one brother killed his other brother, right? Cain killed Abel, and Adam and Eve, who knows if there'd have been another guy or another girl, maybe one of them would have left the other one for somebody else. I don't know. It's like, humanity. G.K. Chesterton is one of my favorite guys to quote. He was an old Catholic theologian, and G.K. Chesterton says, original sin is the only philosophy empirically validated by 3,500 years of human history. What does that mean? It means from the very beginning of time, people have been screwing up. But to me, and I think that's an important lesson, to me, let's take leadership, for example. Your people don't expect you to be perfect. Every leader is going to blow their stack once in a while, right? But it's the difference between the two leaders. The one leader who blows his stack and chews somebody out in front of the office and then never says anything about it. But then the other guy blows his stack, chews somebody out in front of the office, and then the very next time they get together for a team meeting, he says, hey, before we get started, I have to make a personal apology to Joe because what happened the other day was completely inappropriate and not indicative of the kind of leader that I want to become. And I owe not only him an apology, but the rest of you that heard it. And I'm going to make a commitment to not do that again.
That's a leader. Huge. Oh my gosh.
Giant. Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, you talk about building trust. You actually build more trust through that situation than you would if you were ever, quote unquote, perfect as a leader.
Yeah, absolutely. Because everybody knows people have bad days and make mistakes, but it's, do you own it? Are you self-aware? Do you correct it?
Well, and if they're going to follow a leader and they think that leader is perfect, and granted, like we're talking about Zig Ziglar, never having a scandal and so forth, but he's not perfect either. No. There's nobody perfect. But if we think that we have to be perfect, then we're not going to aspire to be a leader because there's no way that we're going to look at ourselves honestly and say, what, we can never do that. So very, very important. And I think that, what you talked about, integrity it is a yes or no. You're in integrity or you're out of integrity. There's no gray area in terms of a situation. But when it comes overall, I think none of us can say we're perfectly in integrity all the time.
No.
Because then you're in full, anybody who says it is in full delusion.
Sure.
But this is great. So how do people find out more about, so you speak, you've got books, you've got your podcast. How do people find out more about what you're up to? And I know you're on I think you said 5 to 10 podcasts a week. I mean, you're really
I'm doing a lot. I'm doing a lot. And then I'm actually, I'm in the middle of doing I get asked all the time, I want to become a speaker. Can you help me? And so I do coaching for people. I do a year-long coaching program where people who want to learn the absolute nuts and bolts of becoming a speaker, because in the speaking industry, there's people that will teach you how to do marketing or teach you how to do a great speech, but there's not somebody that teaches you the entirety of everything from your website to your demo video to writing your book to podcasting, the whole thing. And so that's what I do with people now. And then I'm right in the middle of actually creating the Chris Widener Speakers Academy. I've got, I think, 30 faculty members, friends of mine who are big speakers. In fact, I added it up. My faculty has made over $200 million in speaking fees in the last 25 years. Wow. And none of them a celebrity. None of them started out having won 5, gold medals, and they started out making 75 grand a speech. All of them are men and women who started from the very bottom rung and started building their speaking business and raising their fees and making more money. And so lots of just nuts and bolts stuff. So I'm doing a lot of recording on that of all my faculty. Now we're doing the same thing we're doing here, Zoom recordings, and they're talking about areas of expertise for them. So I do executive coaching. I've got a few executive coaching clients, but Larry and my book is coming out in a couple days, The Real Man's Hand Guide, 12 Commitments Real Men Make. We have our first conference coming up on October 27th. And of course, the podcast is realmanpodcast.com. think we've done 72 episodes so far, and they're funny, they're fun, they're funny, they're insightful. We actually have a lot of women that listen to it. I would guess 25-30% of our listenership is women, because they comment a lot on the things, and
Well, women appreciate real men. They do.
well, that, and the funny thing is that a lot of this stuff is neither male nor female.
Yeah.
Being honest, it's neither male nor female, right? Working hard, being disciplined, that's neither male nor female, but we put it into context of men and why they need to be so, and that kind of thing.
Yeah.
So I still give my speeches, still giving, 20, 25 speeches a year. And I just sketched out my next book. It's actually going to be my 21st book. And It's called It's a Deal: How to Think Big, Grow a Massive Network, and Close More Deals. So working on that.
Fantastic.
I'm a little ADD.
Yeah, well, it sounds like you're doing one thing in many different arenas.
Yeah, and that's what I tell people. It's all under the scope of teaching and training and self-help, personal development, business.
Yeah. Yeah. Now, before we end, I know I'm going to have a few speakers who are going to be listening to this that are in my community that are saying, you have to ask this question. So I'll be remiss not to do it. Is one of the biggest things, and obviously your academy goes into much more detail about this, but I know a bunch of speakers who are very talented speakers, even have authority, credibility in their arena, but that are having trouble getting paid speaking engagements. What would be a suggestion, recommendation for them?
Yeah, it's interesting. I hired a coach in the 90s, and I'll never forget, this is how old it was. He said, send me a video cassette of you speaking. So I sent him a VHS of me speaking. And our next call, he said, Chris, I got to tell you, you are one of the best speakers I've ever heard. You're dynamic, you're funny, you're fun, you're blah, blah, blah. And I'm thinking, this is great, right? And then he says, now you need to know something. I said, what's that? And he says, it doesn't matter. And I said, well, what are you talking about? He said, it's all about marketing. There will be people who are worse speakers than you who will get the gig because nobody has seen you speak yet. And so they're just going on the marketing materials and things like that. So it's interesting. The world has changed a lot since then. And so, for example, I've got a number of things in the academy. One is Mark Sanborn, who's been one of the longtime most successful speakers. He's got a thing on how to sell to corporations. A guy named Ed Rigsby, who has not only been a professional speaker for 30 years, but he's been an association executive for 20 years. He does a whole segment on how to sell to associations. So selling to corporations is different than selling to associations, which is different than selling to churches or to colleges or to whatever. So, but it all boils down to one thing. It's your message, it's your marketing, those kinds of things. So if somebody says, how do I get more gigs? I would say you need to focus on your marketing and getting the word out there. Nobody, Zig always used to say, I haven't made an outbound phone call in 20 years. Well, there was Zig, and then there's everybody else, right? Everybody else has to make phone calls. So, we're on LinkedIn, doing LinkedIn stuff, reaching out to association executive directors, reaching out to podcast hosts to get the word out, reaching out to, and it's really simple to use LinkedIn. I've got 15,300 LinkedIn connections. And it's really only been in the last 3 months that I've really taken it seriously. And the learning that I'm doing on it, we actually have somebody in the academy, how to book yourself through LinkedIn. But you can search, I live in Arizona Association Executive Director. And if they live in Arizona and they're an executive director as a title and the company is an association, it pulls them up and connect, and they connect. You make an overture. You don't want to start pitching yourself right away, but that's a very simple way, is just use LinkedIn to connect with association directors, or join there's a thing called the ASAE, American Society of Association Executives. You can join as a vendor, and each state has its own chapter. So the Wisconsin Society of Association Executives, join as a vendor. Again, don't go in selling yourself, pitching yourself, but go in, create value, help, join a board, a committee, something like that. Connecting with meeting planners, all you have to do is Arizona meeting planners or Phoenix meeting planners, or whatever. Make a connection. Join your local chapter, Meeting Planners International, as a vendor. And lots and lots of ways to do it. A lot of it is content. getting a lot of content out there. A lot of video is popular now, so doing video content creation. I'm interviewing a gal, Colette Carlson, who's a longtime friend of mine. I don't know if you know Colette or not, out of San Diego, but she gets most of her engagements through content marketing, articles. So placing articles with associations and companies and other websites, and at the bottom it always has, some sort of I don't know exactly, but if it's like I would expect it to be. Colette Carlson is a professional speaker. She speaks at meetings, blah blah blah. For more information, contact her here. Right? And people read the article, and you might think, would somebody ever hire somebody because they read an article? I made about $120,000 on an article I wrote once, years ago. I answered the phone, and a lady says to me, this was probably early 90s. She says to me, no, it had to have been later than that because I was already on the internet. So 97, 98 maybe. She says, I've been told by the CEO of our company that I'm supposed to hire you to come and speak at our convention. Okay, that's the one you want. You don't have to pitch them, nothing. And she said, it's at the Whistler, Maine, that big, beautiful hotel with a Chateau Whistler. Mm-hmm. And I said, great. And she said, what's your fee? And at the time, my fee was $4,500. I said, $4,500. She said, well, will you give us real meat and potatoes? And I said, yeah, sure, I'll give you meat and potatoes. And she said, okay, then I'll pay you $6,000. And I said, okay, that's funny. And I said, why do you want to pay me $6,000? And she said, you're the last speaker we're hiring, and I have $6,000 left in my budget. If I don't spend it, I won't get it next year. So I'll pay you $6,000, but you got to promise you'll be really good. And I said, okay. I said, how did you hear about me? And she said, my CEO read some article of yours online, really liked it, and he gave me your name, and I looked you up and found you and called you, and he said, hire this guy. So I show up, and it was about 150 to 180 big business owners, CEOs, business owners in the food distribution world. And I booked over $100,000 worth of speaking engagements out of that $6,000 speaking engagement, because they all said, oh, I love this guy. You got to come to my company and teach all my salespeople that. And it was because I had an article out there that at the bottom told people how to get back with me, and that I do speaking engagements and those kinds of things. So get yourself out there, content, video content, written content, all those kinds of things, and always be selling. Always be selling.
Yes, absolutely. Well, thank you. That is great. And I think of one of the people that asked me, I said to her, well, in one word, if I can give you one word, it's hustle.
Gotta hustle.
Get out there. You got to do it. It's not going to come to you. And unfortunately, there are employees that are used to being employees and having things come to them that are not used to now going out there and promoting themselves. And that's where the learning curve is.
I'll give you an example. I just booked 2 engagements, and this is funny. I'll tell you the story because I made a rookie mistake. I was so disappointed with myself, but I saved it. It got saved. I decided I wanted to go speak for one company. It's probably a Fortune 20 company. It's one of the 20 biggest companies in the country. I won't say which one, but reached out, and I always start, this is my strategy for LinkedIn. I start at a lower level, and I create a bunch of connections in the company. Then you go to a higher level, and when they see your mutual connections, they start recognizing names of people that work for them or in their divisions or whatever. And I got myself to a very high level in the senior vice president role of this major corporation. And every single one of them at that level, when they would accept the connection, I'd say, hey, thanks so much for connecting. I really appreciate it. Just want to introduce myself to you. I'm a professional speaker. I've written 20 books, including a few on leadership, including The Art of Influence. Please let me know if I can ever serve you or your organization. And one of them, about a month and a half, 2 months ago, wrote back and said, oh, I'll pass this along to the people that hire for our events. Week and a half, 10 days ago, I get a phone call. Hey, your name was passed on to me from this person, and we need you to come give 2 speeches, and one on this date and then one a couple days later. And I said, okay, perfect. And she said, so what's your typical speaking fee? And I said, well, it's typically $20,000, but and this was my rookie mistake. I'm never going to make it again. But even after 30 years, you still make rookie mistakes. And I said, but since you're hiring me twice, I could do a little bit better on that for you. And then luckily she saved it for me. She says, oh no, it's no problem. I got the budget, so I'll pay you the whole thing for both. And I went, oh, perfect. So out of LinkedIn, reaching out, offering to serve in any way, just a quick introduction, offering to serve. I booked $40,000, 2 speaking engagements in Q1 for a major corporation. And that's just hustle, right? It's just taking the time to reach out and introduce yourself. A lot of times I'll offer to send them the book, The Art of Influence, if they're a VP of sales or something, or a CEO. I'll say, hey, can I send you a copy of my book, The Art of Influence? And then we mail it to them. Or if I don't have a bunch of copies here, I'll just jump on Amazon and ship it to them. It costs me $11, $8 or $9 plus the $3 shipping. And, I can send out 100 of those things, still make money when one of them buys me for a speech or something.
Yeah. That's awesome. Chris, thank you so much. I love that, those examples, and that perfect example, because I know that'll encourage a lot of people to get out there and really do what it takes, and that it's worth it. And you got to know, coming back to the mindset, the being, it's like you got to believe that it's possible. And so I appreciate you so much coming on and sharing from your experience, 30 years experience in working with, not only working with great legends, but also becoming a great leader yourself, world-renowned speaker, and so forth. So thank you so much. So for our listeners, they can go to chriswidener.com. Also, I'll do a shout out for your podcast, therealmanpodcast.com as well. And anything else that they need to know in terms of, I think everything's at chriswidener.com, right?
Yeah, and if anybody is interested in some coaching in the speaking business, it's chriswidener.com/speaker-coaching. So the extension is speaker-coaching, and all the information there, everything that we cover in the year-long program is there. And it's one-on-one with me. It's not group coaching. I only take up 10 clients a year, and they have my cell phone number. They call me, we talk, and we take them through the whole process.
Perfect. So we'll make sure all that's in the notes as well. So for our listeners that are driving, that are not writing all this down, go to leadersoftransformation.com and just type in Chris, and his podcast will come up. You'll see the show notes there, and all the links will be there so you can get connected to Chris. Chris, again, thank you so very much for being here. And thank you to our listeners for being here. We really appreciate you. And, I always say at the end of every episode, I always say, make sure that you take action. Leaders of Transformation, take action. Nothing happens. You can hear and learn all of the wonderful tips and tools and all that wonderful stuff, but until you actually apply it in your life, nothing happens. So I encourage you to take something today that Chris has shared and apply it. And I look forward to hearing all the stories. You can find us on social media or through our website. And we look forward to seeing you in the next episode of Leaders of Transformation real soon.